أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم إن الحمد لله نحمده ونستعينه ونستغفره ونعوذ بالله من شرور أنفسنا ومن سيئات أعمالنا من يهده الله فلا مضل له ومن يضلل فلا هادي له وأشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وأشهد أن عبده ورسوله. All praise belongs to Allah. We praise Him and we ask Him for guidance and forgiveness. We seek protection in Allah from the malice of our own souls and the evil of our actions. Whoever Allah guides, no one can lead him astray, and whoever He makes astray, no one can lead him back to the right path. I bear witness that there is no deity but Allah by Himself, no associate, and I bear witness that Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam is His slave and messenger. So there's a couple of things actually that I want to touch on before we kind of get into the main aspect. So first of all, we know about Abu Sufyan. So Abu Sufyan, he has now accepted Islam. He took his shahada. He is now a Muslim. But Abu Sufyan was very reluctant in his acceptance. So although he had accepted it, if you remember when we talked about the process of his conversion with his close friend and also the uncle of the Prophet ﷺ, Al-Abbas, it was almost like he was in between a rock and a hard place. And he had no choice. He had no option but to accept Islam, and either that or he was going to get executed. Now, deep down, he knew the truth anyway. So it was just a matter of time of just acknowledging this truth. And that was the opportunity for him. He accepted it. He's now a Muslim. But his position was still a position of mentally and psychologically still very weak in Iman, you could say. He wasn't completely convinced, and he had it was all very new for him, overwhelming for him, you could say. So that morning when Abu Sufyan accepted Islam and they're about to leave, Al-Abbas says to the Prophet ﷺ, "Oh, Ya Rasul, look, he is a man of stature. He is a man of respect amongst his people. He's a leader. Give him something more." So the Prophet ﷺ understood what he meant by this. So he said to Abu Sufyan, he said, whoever enters the house of Abu Sufyan, he will be safe. And whoever enters their own home, shuts the door and locks the door, they will be safe. And whoever enters the masjid, meaning the Haram Sharif, they will also be safe. And this was in itself, there was a lot of wisdom in this. Firstly, from Al-Abbas, in the sense that he knew his friend's character. They grew up together. There wasn't a huge difference in ages between them. They grew up together. They were close. They used to hang out together. They were friends. So he understood the character of Abu Sufyan. He understood his demeanor, his personality. And therefore, he suggested to the Prophet ﷺ that, look, give him something over and above. Look, yes, he's become a Muslim now, but he needs some more leverage, both in his mind and also amongst his people. And when the Prophet ﷺ heard this, he immediately understood that, right, okay, 100%, Abu Sufyan, he needs something more. And therefore, he offered or suggested that whoever enters his house or whoever enters those 3 locations, there may have been another couple of houses that were mentioned, but those people would be under the protection of Abu Sufyan, and ultimately under the protection of the army. They will not be harmed. They will not be attacked. They will be spared. And you have to understand that this is a huge thing. This leverage, you could call it, for Abu Sufyan was huge, because it meant that he could still have that respect and authority amongst his people. Now, as they're about to leave, Prophet ﷺ holds back Al-Abbas, and he says to Al-Abbas, before you take him away and before he goes back to his people, take Abu Sufyan to the peak of the mountain and put him in a position, wait there in a location where you're slightly high and you have a good view of the whole army. and let him see this army as we enter Mecca. So Al-Abbas does exactly that. They go to this location, and we're now talking about how the army is beginning to progress and move forward and start taking control and set up their position strategically around Mecca. And we'll talk about that, what that looked like in a few minutes, inshallah. So, I mean, I always imagine, you see some of these movies that show you, World War II, or, these like fictional movies where these huge armies of people, and you see, and there's such a vast array, and it just goes, forever into the horizon, and there's squadrons and men and soldiers all armed up and, organized and ready for battle. And in my mind, I think, I imagine that the scene probably looked something similar to that. We're talking about 10,000 men. So Abu Sufyan and Al-Abbas, they are standing here and they're watching these squadrons, these contingents slowly making their way past them. One contingent would pass by, and Abu Sufyan would say to Al-Abbas, who are these guys? I don't recognize them. And Al-Abbas would reply and say, that's the Banu Sulaim tribe. And Abu Sufyan would reply and say, yeah, no big deal. They don't really worry me. Then another squadron would come by, and he would ask the same question again, who are these guys? And Al-Abbas would reply, that's the Banu Muzayna tribe. And again, Abu Sufyan would look at them and say, you know what? Yeah, no big deal. They don't really worry me. Fine, whatever. And they would continue doing this for a period of time as these various squadrons, which consisted of different tribes of Muslims, came through and came past them. Eventually, one particular squadron came past. And this particular squadron was highly organized, tightly packed, and they looked sort of, miles above the rest. And Abu Sufyan said, who are these guys? And these guys were fully armored up. They had the battle gear on, they had their armor on, and the only thing you could see were their eyes. They were elite. So Abu Sufyan says to Al-Abbas, who are these guys? And Al-Abbas says, this is the squadron of the Prophet ﷺ. This was the squadron that consisted of the Ansar and of the Al-Muhajirun, the original warriors, if you like. These guys were veterans. They had encountered numerous battles. They had gone in, they had come back out victorious, and these guys knew how to fight. So they were a level and a cut above the rest. And it was obvious just by looking at them. Abu Sufyan saw this, reacted to this, and looked at Al-Abbas, and he said, oh, Abu Fadl, which is also his kunya. He said, the kingdom of your nephew has become great indeed. Wow, this is something else. And Al-Abbas replies to him and says, oh, Abu Sufyan, this is not a kingdom. This is prophethood. So he made a very clear distinction. He said, yeah, you can get people together. You can get the elite crew together, and you can call it an army, a vast army, a kingdom of people that are, controlled by a central power. This isn't that. The reason that all these people are here, the reason that they have this conviction and that they're here to fight and to stand their ground and fight for what they believe in is because of the prophethood. And that's what's driven them to this. That's what's achieved this. It's not through anything else. Now, there's some very interesting and important things to take away from this. First of all, why did the Prophet ﷺ put Abu Sufyan and Al-Abbas, or rather ask Al-Abbas to take Abu Sufyan to this location? Because he wanted to show him the power and the force of this army. Abu Sufyan still needed convincing. And this was one way to show him that, look, what you're seeing now, you don't stand a chance against this. This is something that you have no control over. You cannot retaliate against this. And resisting this is futile. There's no point. It also showed that actually the Muslims had really become a force to be reckoned with, right? They were well organized. They had their contingents, they had their orders, they had their leaders of each of these contingents, and there were a vast number of them. Okay, this basically installs fear into the enemy when you look at the vast numbers and how well organized they were. And effectively, if they wanted to, they could wipe them all out without a problem. And what this suggests actually is that for Abu Sufyan, there is only one option. Yes, he's become a Muslim, but this army is about to enter Mecca. And the only option that Mecca have is to surrender, complete and utter surrender. There is no other option. This was really important to Abu Sufyan, for Abu Sufyan to see. But in that message, also the Prophet ﷺ wanted to be very clear that we're not here to kill and cause bloodshed. We're here for a peaceful resolution. We want to do this without shedding blood. And when you look at the size of this force, you'll understand that there is no chance against this. So you may as well surrender, do it peacefully, and therefore talk about next steps, inshallah. The other thing that's really important to take away from this, and it's worth mentioning, is that, you know, different people have different levels of understanding. If you took one of the original Sahaba or someone from the Ansar or Muhajirun, their journey and their experience from the beginning was very different. They faced the pain and the suffering and the events from a very early stage. And then you had newer Muslims that accepted Islam later. Their background and experience was different. And in this case, where you got someone like Abu Sufyan being very new to Islam, it was almost like, you have to deal with him differently. You have to offer him something that makes sense in his mind, right? So he had to kind of rationalize this in his mind. He had to make sense of this in his mind, and therefore the approach that the Prophet ﷺ used was slightly different for him, right? He may have used a different approach for somebody else, but for a guy who's a leader, who's a chieftain amongst his people, who's got authority, who's a man of pride, he needed certain actions. And the Prophet ﷺ, in his wisdom, he did these things that worked for Abu Sufyan. And it shows you that sometimes you have to adapt your style. You have to adapt your approach depending on the audience that you're dealing with. It's the same for us today. If I'm talking to my kids and I want them to do something, I have to understand their psyche. I have to understand what makes them click. And then I would try and say to them, look, beta, it's time for Salah. Go and do wudu. Go and get ready for Salah. I'll give them gentle encouragement. I maybe suggest to them, look, go pray, and then we'll go out. We'll go to the park. I'll treat you somewhere. So I have to approach them in a different tact. When you're talking to an adult, for example, whether it's a Muslim or a non-Muslim, you have to change your approach, right? You're not gonna say, oh man, yeah, why don't you pray? If you don't pray, you're gonna go to hell. No, it doesn't work like that. You have to offer words that make sense to that person. Sometimes you have to have a soft approach. Sometimes you have to speak the brutal truth. Whatever it is, the trick and the skill set here is that you have to adapt what you're trying to say based on the audience that you have in front of you. And this is a very valuable lesson for all of us, because we've already identified in a lot of our previous talks, we've said that, look, as Muslims in the West, the biggest priority, the biggest fard upon us, take away your regular obligations like your salah and all that sort of stuff. But the other biggest obligation upon us, especially in the West, is to spread the message, is dawah. What does that mean? Dawah can take many different forms. Some people are good at talking on a microphone on a stage. Some people are great at writing blogs. Some people are great at recording something and sharing it across social media, whatever the case is. Some people are just That's not them. They don't have the confidence, but they have the confidence to get up in a meeting, go to their salah, tell their boss, I'm going to for salah, excuse me, thank you very much. That is dawah. The point is, each one of us has a different skill set. We're not all great at everything. Some of us are good at some things, some of us are not so good at other things. The trick is, take what you are good at, take the stuff that you have to do, apply it in your life, apply it in your environment, amongst your family, amongst your friends, in your community, in your workplace, and do it gently, do it softly, practice your deen. And automatically, I think you'll find that you're by default, you're doing dawah and you're not even trying. Subhanallah. What we do, unfortunately, is the fear gets to us. You know, we're sitting in our meeting and we think it's salah time. If I don't go now, I'm going to miss it. But how many of us have that conviction? How many of us have that belief to say, do you know what? I am going to get up and I'm going to go and do my salah before I miss it. I don't care about my boss because he doesn't really pay my wages, right? You do it in a respectful way, but you get my point. So we talked about these different battalions. Prophet ﷺ, he allocated different leaders for each one of these battalions. So, for example, Khalid bin Walid, and we all know who he is, was given one flank to control and manage and take to a certain part of Mecca. Al-Zubair, radiallahu anh, he was given another contingent, and his contingent consisted of predominantly al-Muhajirun, okay? Because he was considered the superior, maybe superior is the wrong word, but senior member of the Muhajirun, and therefore he got that role of controlling predominantly the Muhajirun in his contingent. And then you had Sa'd bin Ubadah. He predominantly had the Ansar because he was the senior guy amongst the Ansar. And we're also familiar with Sa'd bin Mu'adh, who wasn't here at this time because he was martyred previously. But the next in line, you could say, was Sa'd ibn Ubadah. And he was given the control of the contingent, which predominantly included Ansar. Now, as you can imagine, an army of 10,000 people, you're coming back to a city after so many different hardships, so many different curveballs have been thrown at you for the last at least 8 years, if not more. If you're a Muhajirun, you know, it's another 13 years prior to that. So emotions are running high. You know, adrenaline is pumping. There's a lot of people. Everyone's got their arms ready. Their swords are sharp. They've got their shields. They're dressed up, ready for a fight. So, you know, there's a buzz. There's an anxiety now that if a battle breaks out, there's going to be a fight. So some of this emotion takes over Sa'd. And as he walks by with his squadron, he sees Abu Sufyan. And he looks at Abu Sufyan and he says, "Oh, Abu Sufyan, don't you know that today is a day of great battle? Today, the Kaaba will be no sanctuary for you." That were his comments to Abu Sufyan. Abu Sufyan got taken aback straight away. He'd only just accepted Islam. But what was Sa'd trying to achieve by saying this? He had no real intention, or let's say he had no bad intention through his comments. The emotion and the adrenaline and the situation took over him. So he made these remarks, trying to have a dig at Abu Sufyan, effectively saying, look, today, we know it's the Kaaba, we know it's Haram, and we know it's a sanctified, holy, sacred place. But today we've got an allowance for a fight, for a battle. And today there's going to be bloodshed. It was like a threat, if you like. Today there's going to be bloodshed, and the Kaaba is desanctified for today. And we're going to make the most of it. You could call it an empty threat, but it was a threat nonetheless. Abu Sufyan obviously didn't like this comment because he didn't know what was going to happen. I mean, potentially emotions could get carried away and you know, unnecessary killing of his people could take place. When Abu Sufyan saw the Prophet ﷺ, he complained about Saad to the Prophet ﷺ. And our Prophet ﷺ replied, and he said, you know, Saad has lied. Today is not a day of bloodshed. It's not a day of a great battle. Today is a day that God will glorify the Kaaba. Straight away, you can see how Prophet ﷺ kind of diffused the situation, right? Tensions are building up. And, you know, this is the Kaaba we're talking about. This is the most holiest site for Muslims today. And even prior to this, for the Arabs, since Ibrahim al-Islam, we know that this location, this place, this house is sacred in so many ways. There's so many things you can't do there that you could otherwise do in other places because it has a certain it's sacred in so many different ways, and Allah Ta'ala has made it like this. So our Prophet ﷺ immediately, he took Saad's comments and he said, look, this is not true. That's like a lie. It's not going to happen. Today we're not here to do damage, but rather we're here to glorify the Kaaba. Apologies, my phone is ringing there, but it'll go off in a second. As a result, Prophet ﷺ, he took the banner away from Saad. All these leaders had their own banners, and the idea of the banners was to one state and show who you are and what part of the army you are, and then plant the banner in the area that you have taken control of. So to diffuse the situation further, Prophet ﷺ took the banner away from Saad and he gave it to Al-Zubair, and he asked him to go and plant it in a certain location. Another narration actually says that the banner was given to Qais, who was the son of Saad. But you know, nonetheless, Allah knows best. But the banner certainly was taken away from Saad as a result of this, to diffuse the situation. And again, these actions and the steps that the Prophet ﷺ took showed that there was an intention of peace. There was no intention here of bloodshed and killing and wiping out people and taking control in an aggressive manner. The whole idea was peace. Furthermore, to show this, Prophet ﷺ gave very explicit instructions to each of his leaders of the army to say, look, keep your swords in their sheaths. Don't pull them out unless you absolutely have to. Meaning there's no need to attack anybody. There's no need to harm anybody unless you're faced a situation where you have to retaliate and you have to defend yourselves. That's the only condition. Otherwise, we're not going in there to kill or do anything of that nature. Now, each one of these contingents had a certain strategic direction they had to take. So, for example, Khalid bin Walid was given the role of entering Mecca from the south. So if you've seen Mecca, I did actually have a map that I wanted to show you, but maybe I'll share that with you next time. But Mecca, it's a very hilly and mountainous region. So you have access points or roads that will go in and out of the city, just like any city, right? So you have a road that goes in from the south. You have one from the west. You have one from the north. Other locations, other areas don't necessarily have roads and access points because it's mountainous and hilly and people don't go through there. It's just impossible to make your way through there. Khalid bin Walid was given the job of entering from the south, from the bottom. Al-Zubair, he was given the role of entering from the left flank, the west side, and the Prophet ﷺ was going to enter Mecca from the north, so from the top, if you like. So each one of these leaders of their contingents had a specific role to basically surround the city. 10,000 men surrounding the city in strategic locations, blocking the access points and preventing people from entering, preventing people from exiting. Any other routes technically can't be used. So again, you see how, the tactic here was very smart to say, look, you don't just enter from one point and, sort of ram raid through the whole city. You surround it, you take control. You don't give people options. And that's exactly what they did. In the meantime now, Abu Sufyan, he rushes back to his people. He knows that he's got to go back and warn his people so that they don't do anything silly and they understand what's about to come through those doors, so to speak. So he heads back to the city center. If you remember, the way Mecca, the city center where the Kaaba is, the way it works is it's very much a central zone. It's a central zone where there are bazaars, there are markets, all the hustle and the bustle takes place here. People, when they want to make announcements, they go to the Kaaba and they will make announcements, and whatever it is, information that they want to give out, they will do it there. And it's like the public place that all of these things would take place. So Abu Sufyan's intention is, right, I'm going to go back. I've got to head straight back, and I have to warn my people that there's a big issue. So he enters Mecca. He heads towards the Kaaba, and when he reaches there, he shouts and calls out to all his people, all the people that are in the area, in the vicinity. And he says to them that, look, there is Muhammad. He's on the outskirts of this city, and he brings a force with him that you cannot withstand. He's literally on our doorstep. If you want to survive this, you've got to listen to what I'm saying, and you've got to understand that if you come to me and come into my house, you will be safe and you'll be protected. I was just with Muhammad this morning, and I'm guaranteeing you this is exactly what's happening, and it's no lie. It's going down. When he starts making this statement, don't forget he's the leader. He's the most senior guy there. Okay, they don't know he's become a Muslim. They know him as their chieftain, right? So there's chaos, there's commotion, there's anger. People are saying, what are you talking about? What do you mean? What, Muhammad, who? What army? What are you talking about? And this in itself, I found very, very interesting, because this is a miracle from Allah, that when this army of 10,000 men left on around the 8th of Ramadan, by the time they got to Mecca, or the outskirts, there's a location just on the outskirts of Mecca, nobody had spotted them. They were hiding in plain sight, you could say. And how is that possible for 10,000 soldiers, an army of 10,000? It just defies logic. But again, this shows you the miracle from Allah, that he didn't want people to know. The whole idea was that this force would creep up. It would come right to the point, right on their doorstep, and no one would see them, no one would know about them. And by the time they did, it was too late. How do you hide this many people? The only way you do that is through a miracle from Allah. So there's commotion, there's chaos, people are arguing, Abu Sufyan's trying to explain. In the meantime, word gets back to his wife. And if you remember, Abu Sufyan's wife is a woman by the name of Hind. And we're all familiar with that name. And we're all familiar with, some of the atrocities and the acts she did historically. So she's a woman. She's like, if somebody wears the trousers in the house, it's her. She hears about this and she heads straight to to Abu Sufyan and wants to deal with this. She makes her way through the crowd. She heads up to Abu Sufyan, grabs him by his mustache, twists his mustache, and starts hurling abuse at him. She starts cursing him with the most vile words that you can possibly imagine. She refers to him and literally says to him, why don't you just kill this lazy bag of fat? He is worthless. He's a disgrace to our people. He's not fit to be a leader. He is nothing. Just, he's talking nonsense. Just kill him, get rid of him. He's worthless. Abu Sufyan, he knows the truth. So he responds back and he says, don't let this woman deceive you. Trust me that there is Muhammad. He's out there. He's got an army that you can't defeat. You either listen to me or you don't, but it's happening. Then he decides that actually, I need to elaborate a little bit more on this. So some people started challenging him. They said, well, look, you've offered us to come into your house, but, we're not all going to fit in your house. So you can see now, even here, Abu Sufyan wanted to retain a little bit of control. It's only at this point that he now mentions, actually, well, if you go into your own house as well and you shut the door and lock the door, you will be safe. I've been told that you'll be fine. You'll be under my protection and Muhammad will not harm you. And also, if you enter the masjid, the haram, there you will also be safe. But that's what you need to do. So people panic. They understand that something's about to happen. We need to react. We need to get a move on. And again, you have to understand that why were these three options put on the table? When you go into the middle of a location in a hustling, bustling city center, there are a combination of people there. And it's the same in Mecca at this particular scenario. Some people live there. Some people have homes there around the corner. Some people have homes on the other side of the city. Some people are outsiders. They might be businessmen. They might be traders. They might be there for some religious purpose, because of all the sort of paganism and the various idols they had there. They had other reasons to be there. So some of these people couldn't get to their homes. And therefore, by offering these other options to these people, it gave them a way out. It gave them a solution. It gave them a choice that actually, you're not going to be left high and dry. You have a choice. If you take that option, you'll be safe, right? It wasn't a case of let's barge through, kill whoever you like, take it over, job done. No, go there and you'll be safe. SubhanAllah, look at the wisdom here that all of these people had options. And Abu Sufyan, now that he had no choice, he relayed all of these options to all of the people. So people dispersed. They started making their way to their homes, to Abu Sufyan's house, to various other locations to try and get out of harm's way. On the other side, now you had Khalid bin Walid. He has entered Mecca from the south. And there's a region, a location, an area called Khandama. I believe that's what it's called. So he enters and he tries to fix his control in that region. But he is faced with some resistance. Who is this resistance? There was a group of several individuals who decided that, we're not going to take this. Now, news was spreading. People knew that it was an attack and takeover that's imminent. And when I say imminent, I mean, like, this army is not even an hour's walk from the city, right? So you could say, I don't know, if I was to walk from the end of Sippenham in Slough all the way to Arsam's house in Langley, it would probably take me an hour. That's the distance we're talking about, a couple of miles, not much. And when the army already advancing, you don't have much time to do anything. You have barely enough time to get your loved ones, get your family, get your possessions, find a safe location, and hope that you're okay at the end of this. So commotion's there. But there were three men who convened and they decided that, you know what, we're not going to take this. These three men were Safwan ibn Umayyah, Ikrimah ibn Abi Jahl, and Suhail bin Amr. All of these names we should be familiar with. And these three guys were stark enemies of Islam and the Prophet ﷺ. They decided that they were going to create a rebellion and they were going to fight back. So they started collecting men, drafting them in, trying to plan how they're going to do this. They were going to resist. They were going to fight. And they needed to put a plan in place to deal with Khalid bin Walid. There was another man, a Quraysh, man of the Quraysh, and his name was Himas ibn Qais. And he was in his home and he found out about this rebellion and he knew that, right, I'm going to go and join these guys and I'm going to fight. So he was in his house and he had all his weapons out. He was sharpening his sword. He was mending his armor, getting his stuff ready for a fight. And his wife sees this and she says to him, "What are you doing?" So he explains to her, "Look, this is what's happening. Safwan, Ikramah, Suhail bin Amr, they're all planning this and I'm going to go and join them and I'm going to fight them." And she responds and says to him, "Well, actually, you're talking about Muhammad there. He's got a lot of men, right? Are you sure you can handle this?" And Himas, he responds and he says, "You know what? Don't worry about it. I got this. In fact, I might even bring back a couple of servants for you. Yeah, they'll be your servants when I come back. Yeah, we're going to do this." So she said, "Okay, fine. If that's what you think, off you go." So Himas, he takes his gear, he joins forces with the other three, and they've built up a small contingent of men, 20, 30, 40, whatever the number is, and they get into a skirmish with Khalid bin Walid. Some arrows are fired, some hand-to-hand fighting takes place, and what happens is that two of the Muslims from Khalid bin Walid's contingent are killed. But from the other side, narrations say that roughly 15 to 20 men of the Quraysh, of this rebellion, were killed in the process. Now, when they were killed, they were pretty much defeated. It was obvious. So Safwan, Ikramah, and Suhail bin Amr, they were okay at this point. They were still alive. They had survived. But when they saw that their rebellion was pretty much crushed in no time, and don't forget, we're talking about Khalid bin Walid here, yeah, the highest level of warrior that you would get, yeah, you're not going to stand a chance against him. So when they're defeated, what did they do? They ran, they fled. They cowards as they were, they decided enough's enough. Either we die trying. So the whole aspect of last man standing didn't really apply. They wanted to get out and save their skins. So they ran, as did Himas. So Himas runs, heads back to his house, enters his house, tells his wife that, "Look, shut the door, lock the door right now." And she's surprised, saying, "What happened? You guys went out and you're back." So Himas tries to defend himself and he says, "Look, if you had seen the battle that took place at Khandama, this little battle, this skirmish that we were just talking about, and if you had seen warriors like Safwan and Ikramah, if you had seen the way they fled the scene, you wouldn't blame me for anything." Meaning that if these guys who are veterans, who are fighters, who know what they're doing, they ran, I don't stand a chance. So therefore, I knew it was over. I ran, locked the door. We just have to see what happens now. And that was the end of that. This was the only real skirmish that took place. There was no other real resistance in terms of a fight against the Muslims, against the army. This was pretty much it. And it was quashed very, very quickly. Another narration actually does talk about a slightly higher number of people that were killed by Khalid bin Walid. But ultimately, it was just very short-lived. It stood no chance. Now, on the other side, Prophet ﷺ was about to make his entrance into Mecca. Pretty much now, other than this little skirmish, which Khalid bin Walid quashed very quickly, the city was surrounded. It was in full control of the Muslims. They had covered all the entry and exit points. They had men surrounding the place. No one could go anywhere. And if they tried to fight, they'd be in serious trouble. So when you secure a location, when you secure the site, you can now go in and you know that it's secure and it's safe. So at this moment now, Prophet ﷺ knows that it's been secured and it's time to go back into his birth town, his home, where he was born and grew up in. So this day now was the 20th of Ramadan. It was the morning of the 20th of Ramadan. And the reports say that Prophet ﷺ he was dressed in his armor. He was dressed in his armor. He had a helmet on, which he took off, but he was wearing a black turban, and the sort of tail of the turban was hanging in front of him on his between his shoulders. Some reports say he was wearing a red turban, but majority say he's wearing a black turban. Now, today was the day. Today was a day of huge honor and gratitude for our Prophet ﷺ. Let's just recap that since he announced his prophethood, he basically lived 13 years in Mecca. And we know we've covered this already. Those 13 years were what? They were full of oppression. They were full of abuse. They were full of torture. There was a boycott, if you remember that. They had no food. They were starving. The pain and the suffering they went through. If you remember people like Bilal, other Sahabi that were tortured repeatedly, time and time again. This was one of the toughest times. 13 years. And then the Hijrah and a further 8 years. So a sum of around 21 years in total. And now Prophet ﷺ had the opportunity to enter back in his own city. If you remember, he left with just a handful of people. Now he was returning with 10,000. Well, you could say the army was 10,000, but if you actually counted the Muslims in total, behind that, their families, their kids, their relations, and the other tribal members, there were probably many, many more. So you can see that the exponential growth, especially in those last few years before this conquest, was huge. And we spoke about this. When we spoke about the Treaty of Hudaybiyah, the Sahaba, they were so disappointed. Why did we make this deal? This is not good for us. Yet Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had better plans. He had wisdom and he had better plans for the Muslims. And this shows you how those better plans came to fruition, with huge numbers being able to come back into Mecca and take it over. So Prophet ﷺ is riding his camel and he enters Mecca on his camel and he makes his way towards the Kaaba. As he's entering and riding and walking towards the Kaaba, his head is hanging low and he's reciting Surah Al-Fath and thanking Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And if you remember Surah Al-Fath, again, it was meaning the victory. It was revealed at the Hudaybiyah for very good reason. So he's making his entrance, riding in, and his head is hanging low. The narrations say that his head is bowing down almost, if you like, so low that his chin or his forehead was almost touching the back of the camel. So it makes you think that here comes a man with an army of 10,000, a man who is a commander of this army. He has full control. No one can do anything at this point. The site is secure. But he doesn't come in with pride, with arrogance, with his chest out, with his head high, thinking, look what I've done. You kicked me out. I'm back. There's none of that. There's humility instead. There's honor, there's respect, and there's gratitude towards Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for giving this opportunity back to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. He entered Mecca on his camel. He understood the honor this was. And by lowering his head, he was showing humbleness to Allah. And as we said, he was reciting Surah Al-Fath, and he was very, very grateful. And you have to understand that Prophet ﷺ, he did not want power. He did not want fame. He did not want a throne where he could sit and be regarded as the king or the leader. All he wanted to do was fulfill and spread the word of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and through that, the filth and the jahiliyyah that had corrupted this holy, sacred place. That was his only goal. And you could see in his approach and his demeanor and his personality as he enters Mecca that none of this worldly stuff mattered to him. He didn't want to be a leader and show his arrogance, if you like. Na'uz billah. He makes his way to the Kaaba. As he's still on his camel, he performs tawaf. And he has a bow or a staff in his hand. And as he's circulating and making tawaf around the Kaaba, and don't forget, he's not dressed in ihram, or he's not dressed for Umrah or Hajj or anything like this. He's dressed in his battle gear as he's making his way around. If you remember, there are hundreds of idols that are propped up and placed both outside the Kaaba and within the Kaaba. So with his stick, with his staff, he knocks one down at a time. It falls over flat on his face. He knocks another one down, and he repeats this process as he walks around until all of them were completely knocked down. Some say there were around 360 idols in total. He then got down off his camel and wanted to enter into the Kaaba. But guess what? There was even more idols and jahiliyyah inside the Kaaba. So he ordered some of the Sahaba to enter and clean it out. And as they were cleaning it out, getting rid of all of these idols, there were pictures, there were idols, there were arrows that they would use for drawing lots and deciding, which decisions to make in life, and so on and so forth. Some of the Quraysh sort of argued back to say, no, some of these pictures are pictures of Ibrahim. And the Prophet ﷺ said, no, this is not going to happen. You know what? Get rid of them, destroy them all, and wipe it clean. Until all the filth, all the jahiliyyah was completely and physically removed. Then the Prophet ﷺ entered the Kaaba with some of the Sahaba. He entered with Bilal, I believe, Usama, and another man by the name of Uthman bin Talha, who at the time was not a Muslim, but he was the custodian of the keys to the door of the Kaaba. And he enters the Kaaba, shuts the door behind him, and prays 2 rakats as a sign of gratitude to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Some reports suggest that he prayed 6, 2 in each side of the Kaaba, but we'll go with the 2. And that was that. So he only went in once it was cleaned of all the filth that had occupied its space for hundreds of years. Once he exits, after a short time later, he comes out and he has the keys in his hand. Ali radiallahu anh looks at him, looks at the keys, and he says, or rather suggests that, Rasul, why don't you just give us the keys? Give the keys to the Banu Hashim clan. Give that to them, take it away from Uthman bin Talha, and we'll take control of it. And if you remember, the way this used to work was that the two main clans had two separate roles. So when people used to come for a pilgrimage, the Banu Hashim used to feed and host the pilgrims. Whereas the clan of Uthman bin Talha, they were the custodians of the Kaaba. They used to hold the keys and look after it, maintain it, clean it, and protect it. And that was their job. And it was like this for generations. So Ali thought, you know what? Just take it off these guys. You have control. Give it to us. We'll look after it. We'll manage the whole thing. And the Prophet ﷺ looks at Uthman bin Talha and he says, oh, Uthman, perhaps today you see the key in my hand and you can see that I can give it to whoever I like. And Uthman bin Talha replies and says, indeed, today the Quraysh have been destroyed and humiliated. Now, Prophet ﷺ replies back and he says, no, that is not true. Today, the Quraysh have become prosperous and strong. And he handed the keys over to Uthman bin Talha and he said, you are the custodian of these keys. You take the keys, you keep the keys, and this is your job. No one's going to take it away from you. And to this day, the descendants, generations later of Uthman bin Talha, are still the custodians of that key. But you have to understand that even at this point, when the Prophet ﷺ had options to kind of get back at some of these people in terms of the way they had treated him and all the things that they had done to him, yet he did not take that opportunity. He gave him back the key and said, no, you keep it. And why did he not entertain Ali radiallahu anh? Because he thought that if I hand over this whole control to the Banu Hashim, that in itself will create different issues. There will be resentment between one tribe and the other. It will just cause more problems. So let's leave it as it is. Even though they're not Muslims, it doesn't matter. We trust them. They've been doing that job for hundreds of years, right? You don't have to cross a certain line. And again, this was all ways of showing that this was all about a peaceful takeover. There was no favoritism towards his own clan. The last thing he ever did was show favoritism towards anybody. He always picked the right person for the right job. And you can see here that today there was no bloodshed apart from the small skirmish. Muslim, non-Muslim, all the residents of Mecca were safe. We'll stop there, inshallah. Jazakallah khair. We'll see you next week, inshallah.